Welcome to This Club Sucks, grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
Welcome to Child Loss Chat. If you're here, I'm sorry that you need this chat. This particular week is appropriate for not just bereaved parents, but anyone grieving any loss, really. The dates, in quotes, can be problematic for anyone experiencing a significant loss. And while some of our topics really are specific to child loss, this isn't particularly one of them. I am Melissa Monroe. I lost my 2-year-old daughter, Alice, to sudden unexplained death in childhood. It'll be 9 years ago on Saturday. I'm an acupuncturist herbalist in Los Angeles, and this is just something I do for my community. Today's guest is Maurine Neiman. She is a fellow SUDC parent. I wanted to have her help me talk about this topic. Maurine, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. So my name is Maurine Neiman, and I am honored to be invited here by Melissa Monroe, who provides a really just graceful and inspiring example as somebody who's also lost a child. And I am an evolutionary biologist in Iowa City, Iowa, at the University of Iowa, and I lost my son JJ on February 2nd, 2020.
I'm so sorry again that we know each other this way, Maurine. So we have a couple more entrants. Hello, I'm Melissa Monroe. This is Child Loss Chat. These will all be recorded for my upcoming podcast, This Club Sucks, support for grief parents after the lasagnas are long gone. So today we're going to talk about the dates. I'll go ahead and start. The birthdays, the death anniversaries, and for most families, there's another date or two that is particularly tricky. And it can be overwhelming to know what to do, especially in the beginning. I felt that especially in the beginning, there was a lot of pressure to do the right thing on that date. I think if you have living children, or there's other, if it's not your child, but a parent, the other siblings may feel there just seems to be additional pressure around those days in general. It's mostly self-inflicted, let's be honest, at least with me. But in a large family, there can be external pressure as well. So I'll start by saying what I did in the beginning. In the beginning, it sounds like the Bible, and that's really not my intention. My first year out, first year was obviously horrendous, no matter how you slice it. And Alice's birthday and death day are only 11 days apart. So I knew that period was going to be likely really hard. I was aware of that going in. And I knew that I needed something positive to pour myself into to navigate those two difficult days, the first birthday without her and the first anniversary of her death. She died 11 days after her second birthday. I did EMDR therapy after finding Alice, and it made a huge difference in my life, and it worked so quickly, I couldn't believe it. If someone had told me I would feel that much better, that much faster, I would have laughed directly in their face. I would have never believed it. And I was fortunate that in Los Angeles, we have the only sliding scale counseling center in California that offers EMDR and other trauma services. It made an enormous impact. I would not have been able to pay a, a private therapist at that point in my life for that kind of service. So I was extremely grateful. And I thought, I, I can do something to raise a little money for the sliding scale counseling center so that other people can have access to these services. So I contacted them. I said, if I raised a little money, can we earmark it for training, for the training purposes? Because the center also trains therapists in the trauma modalities. And they said yes. And I know a lot of musicians. I'm a huge music fan. So I thought, well, I'll do a concert. That's something I feel like I can do that. I didn't want to get myself in too far above my head because that is my way. I was trying to be conscious of not doing that to myself. I thought that is something I know I can do. That's something I know my community can help me with. That's something I know my community will attend, or at least, enough of them that I can make a little money for the sliding scale counseling center. So I did that the first year and for several years after that. And it was really helpful. It really gave me something to focus on for months, and knowing that I was going to help people that I would never meet ever in Alice's memory really provided meaning for me. It helped me feel like I was continuing her legacy that she did not get to continue for herself. And it made a huge difference. That said, by 2019, it was getting I had a little less help than I used to. It was getting a little harder. And then 2020 hit and I couldn't do it anyway. And so in 2020, my dad was going to be in Lake Tahoe for that week of her birthday, and the dates surrounding her birthday. And so Grace, my other daughter, and I drove up to Lake Tahoe. And it was just what I needed. And it allowed me, there was part of me that felt really guilty for not continuing the concert, because in my head, I thought, this is what I'm going to do every year, forever, in her memory. And, but COVID made it so I couldn't do it even if I wanted to. In the end, long story short, what it showed me was what I really needed at this part of my journey as a bereaved parent was some quiet and some trees and a lake. And so it all worked out. And that's what I've done the last 3 years. And that's for her birthday. At this point, I'll bring up Maurine, and maybe you can tell us some of the things, or one of the things that you have done in JJ's honor on one of the dates.
Yeah, sure. Melissa, a lot is really resonant and parallel in her stories. I lost JJ much more recently, though, than you lost Alice. JJ died in 2020, so I'm not quite 3 years out at this point. And when he died, again, similar to you, he died on February 2nd, and his third birthday was just 5 weeks away. So we had already been planning his birthday party, just having conversations with an almost 3-year-old about what he wanted to do. And he'd just been invited to his first birthday party. And so that was an exciting thing that was coming up. And then he was gone. And so for his birthday happened then 5 weeks after he died. And this was about 2 days before the country shut down for COVID. And so we rather naively had a party in our little tiny house, a birthday party for JJ, where about 50 people came and sang and danced. JJ loved Prince, so there was a lot of Prince music, and it kind of bizarrely ended up being almost a happy event in a very surreal way. But I was absolutely still at this point in shock, as I'm sure, Melissa, you remember. I also did EMDR like you did, like Melissa did. I think by the time the therapist figured out how to do EMDR remotely because of COVID, it took a little while, but I think I did it in May, and that also helped me a lot. And around that time, too, I had also really started to think about making meaning out of JJ's death. I'd read a book by David Kessler called think the fifth stage of grief or mourning, and it focused on making meaning out of the death. And I wanted to do something in JJ's name that could help people directly and in a way that kind of was specific to what I do. So I'm an academic. I'm a biologist at the University of Iowa, and I've been aware for a long time in the work that I do in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space that caregiving and especially childcare is often a force that keeps many very, very talented people and especially women out of science or out of making progress in science or in academics. And so what I ended up doing is deciding I wanted to endow a fund at the University of Iowa in JJ's name that would support academic caretakers in professional endeavors and essentially, provide them the supplies or support that they needed to take care of their kids or other caregiving responsibilities. So maybe they go to a conference and the fund pays for grandparents to come visit or for a portable breast pump or whatever. So I wanted a fund. I wanted it to be endowed, and I decided that it was something that I wanted to have endowed and up and running by JJ's next birthday, so March 10th, 2021. I went to the University of Iowa Foundation, who do these fundraising things. They kind of politely laughed at me and said that was an impossible goal, but they were willing to work with me to do it anyway. And Melissa, as I'm sure you can appreciate, that kind of meant everything to me, and especially as kind of a positive distraction. I opened the fund on the date of JJ's first death anniversary on February 2nd, 2021. And just have anything to think about besides what had happened that day was helpful. And have an amazing set of family and friends and a lot of other people who actually did contribute what we needed to get that fund endowed actually a few days before his birthday. And so then it was up and running, and I think I felt like that was a good birthday celebration. Our second anniversary was just last year, and we already were in a place where we were ready for it to be more quiet. I think both my husband Bennett and I would prefer that February 2nd just drop off the face of the earth and never come back. So I tried my best to just kind of ignore that day. It helped that it was a Tuesday instead of a Sunday, like the day he died. And then for his birthday, I think we just had like a cupcake or something like that. It's such a, like, what do you do? Do you celebrate your dead child in a normal way and kind of pretend, or what do you do? I mean, I think as Melissa's been hinting at, there are not any rules, but I don't think we've yet settled on exactly what should happen.
Yes, and it, like for me, and I know for many other parents and people who have experienced loss, it very well might not be the same every year. And it was a big learning lesson for me that setting off, not that long after not only a major loss but a trauma, because our children's death were completely unexpected. Finding them dead was obviously traumatic, so there's a fair bit of trauma involved also. And so it taught me that I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at the Melissa at that point, like, I'm going to do this thing every year. I I didn't know what day it was, so I don't know where I got off thinking I declare that this is a thing that I'm going to do every year, so that then if I can't do it, I will feel really shitty about myself. So it was a big lesson to me. COVID was actually, has been a total nightmare for many reasons, but the gift of COVID to me was I could not do this thing that I felt in my bones that I maybe couldn't have done that year anyway, if that makes sense. It gave me permission to not do it and have that be okay. I still raise money for that organization, and I will continue to raise money for SUDC as well. But it didn't need to be the big busy thing. That said, the first 4 or 5 years that I did it, I absolutely needed it. I needed the people around me. I needed I needed the executive functioning. As I'm sure many of you know, when there's a trauma, your executive functioning is severely impaired. And so there was, I think, great benefit for me uh, having something to plan where I was doing just a little bit a day. I've always been pretty good at big projects. Doing I'm going to do this much this day, and I'm going to do this much this day, and this is what I can do this day. And so it kept me executive functioning in bite-sized pieces with something to really show for it at the end. And I think that really helped my confidence, which can be shattered when your child dies for no apparent reason. And it definitely helped my brain. So I absolutely needed it the first few years, and I might need it again somewhere down the line. But it was a really good message lesson for me in I'm no longer going to declare this is a thing I'm going to do every year. Because we just don't know, and it's okay if we need to honor those days differently year to year. Now, for Alice's death anniversary, I've always kept that day more on the quiet side. I knew myself well enough to know that it was probably going to be a different shade of grief than her birthday. For a birthday, you can kind of, I had another child. Like, I could figure out ways to find some beauty and happiness, if only for an hour or two. On the birthday, the death day, I was fairly certain that I was going to have trouble doing that. And so I've always kept that day a bit quieter. And what I've done on that day has changed from year to year. The first few years, I knew I had to have a plan. And still to this day, I know I can't be completely alone, but I also can't be in a big crowd. And the person or people with whom I spend my time that day, I have to feel really safe that they're not going to be impacted if I cry a little bit, or if I need to be quiet for a little bit, or something like that. Does that make sense?
I have the same feelings about the death day. Ironically, JJ died on the U.S. Groundhog Day, February 2nd. And my fears, and I don't know how much you feel like this as well, Melissa, are essentially feeling that day coming out, unfolding in a similar way as the day he died. So for me, I'm much more new to this, but I think the more I can maybe be somewhere else or have it be a different routine than that day was, the better. I don't want to feel things happening that remind me of that day. So last year it was a work day, not a weekend. It'll be that way for the next few years, and I think that might be enough to just keep me busy. And I think I need to be busy and distracted, and so that I'm not sitting there thinking about what was happening at this time on February 2nd, 2020. So in some ways, I don't feel like I want to mark that day anymore, really, except in my mind. This is one interesting challenge that I faced, is that my husband and I'd say, despite being closer now than we were before JJ died, kind of amazingly, and I know it doesn't always happen. I'm grateful for that. But he does not want to talk about, think about, delve into anything that happened on that day, and which I understand. I'm much more interested in figuring out what happened and trying to understand it. He does not. So he and I are on the same page then with not wanting to do anything about the death day. I think the birthday is a little bit harder and more awkward because there's part of me, to extend on the theme of feeling like a total failure when your child dies for no reason, feeling like, what's wrong with me if I can't celebrate my kid's birthday in some appropriate way? But what do you do when they're not there anymore? And so I think for Bennett, he doesn't want to dwell in any of that. And I want to go there, but I don't really know how. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong way, but I think I'm still sorting that out for myself.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we will continue to sort out. And we may have a couple of years, um, where I think, oh, okay, that worked, and I'll try that again, and then something else um, may need to come in its place. Uh, I am more like Bennett in that I did not have. I know that some of the SUDC parents had an overwhelmed and really threw themselves uh, into finding out what happened. For me, not knowing that there was no identifiable cause of death was sort of a relief, because I couldn't blame myself if they can't even, if doctors and scientists can't even figure out after months and months and months and many tests. I spent the early few months just terrified that they, trying not to cry because it doesn't make me sad anymore, but it does make me sad to remember that version of myself. I was paralyzed with fear that I had done or had not done something that could have made a difference and could have kept her here. And so for me, the not knowing that it was confirmed by scientists and doctors that like we don't know, for me that was where I was able to say, okay, then rational brain, you have to stop beating yourself up. It can't be your fault if they don't even know what it is. That said, I did and still do need to honor that day. And I honor it by, I don't work on that day. I don't, I provide care to people. And I very rarely take off of a scheduled day of patient care. And I just thought, one little self-care thing I can do for myself is just say, I don't know what I'll do that day, but I'm not working. I'm not going to go take care of other people when I know that no matter how much I pretend that this isn't a day or try to make it different than the day that it happened, I don't want it. I don't want that going on in the background of my head while I'm at work and trying to take care of other people. And I also knew it wasn't a day where maybe my empathy, I am too empathetic, perhaps. It could be argued, and I knew I couldn't really risk taking on anyone else's issues on that day. I knew I couldn't really hear someone complaining that their boyfriend didn't take them to the restaurant they wanted to. I just knew myself well enough to know that, like, I'm just not going to do that. I don't know what I'm going to do. I definitely don't want it to resemble the day she died. But one thing I know I will do for myself is I'm not going to subject myself or my patients to whatever I'm end up working through that day. So that's kind of how I've addressed it. Dr. A, did you have any questions, or is there anyone in listener mode that would like to be brought up to speaker so they can ask a question? Okay, Dr. A.
Okay, I have a question, and if you can't answer it, it's totally fine. Has the way you've taken care of yourself on the anniversary of Alice's death changed over the years?
It has. On the anniversary, the first few years, I felt like I needed a plan. I knew I wasn't going to do anything elaborate. And again, I knew I wasn't going to do a big group thing. Actually, that's not true. The first year, this was kind of not planned, though. This was just kind of my friends rallying around me. The first year I went to a yoga class. I did take the day off work. I went to a yoga class. My friend Pam picked me up and took me to this place called the Peace Labyrinth Gardens that turned out to be right by my house, like walking distance from my house, that I didn't even know about. And that was beautiful. It's a big old estate in Los Angeles in a historic neighborhood, and they have some meditation gardens. And ironically, when we got in there was this massive, gorgeous painting on the ceiling with some angelic looking kids. And when we asked the proprietor about the painting, she informed us that the the family who owned the estate for years lost 5 of their 6 children, and that painting was their children. We just picked this place on a fluke, so that was just like, whoa. Then we went out to the gardens, and you can eat lunch there and stuff as well. We went out to the gardens, and one of the our symbols, one of the things that reminds us of Alice, for long story, is butterflies. And we went out to walk the labyrinth, and there were more butterflies than I could count. So that turned out to be a beautiful thing. And I was glad that I had that little thing planned. When I got home, a few different friends reached out to me and said, do you want me to stop by? And I said, sure, and then it was, well, Jen would like to stop by. This person came. So it ended up being about 8 or 9 friends that just sort of randomly came by that night. And this person brought margaritas, and this person brought a cake, and this person brought some enchiladas or whatever. And that turned out really nice. I could not have planned that. I would not have planned that, because I would have, the planning mode was just not I'm a good planner. I just knew that wasn't a day where I wanted to wear that hat. But it ended up being nice having the support, and the people that ended up coming were all people that were around me in the hours and days afterwards. So I didn't feel pressured to behave or feel or present a certain way. So that turned out to be nice. And then, but I felt less pressure in subsequent years to have a certain thing planned. I do still feel like I have to know that I will see somebody at that point, because I still to this day am aware that that's a day that I can really go too far inside myself. And sometimes that doesn't happen on the day. Sometimes this year it happened 3 days ago. So sometimes it's not always on that day, and I've had to learn how to ask for support when I need it. Which was really a hard thing for me. I've always sort of processed difficult things alone, and not begrudgingly. It's for me, it seems more efficient, and I value efficiency above all, as my friends know. It seems more efficient. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to look at the worried faces of my loved ones. So I'm generally fine being alone, but it became clear to me in that first year that this was not a day for me to be alone, that I needed at least one person to check on me at some point during that day, to make sure that I don't go down a spiral I can't get out of. Does that answer your question, Dr. A?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
How about you, Maureen?
So for his first death anniversary, which was 2021, was the day that we did this kickoff for his fundraiser, and we also did a Zoom memorial sort of service for him that was along the lines of the Jewish yard site service that happens every year after someone dies around the date of their death. So our family, we're Jewish and not religious, but very much culturally connected. And so we did a sort of Jewish adjacent Zoom with some moments of silence, and our rabbi was there, and some words from special people. And it actually ended up being incredibly special and wonderful. Something like 200 people showed up, which blew my mind. He wasn't even 3, and so it was for him, but it was for me, and it was for Bennett, and it was for our family. I mean, I know that, and just for a chance for people to be together, and it was incredibly meaningful to me. Then when 2022 started rolling around, I felt like we didn't need that again. Like we'd kind of done it, and I think part of me just didn't want. I don't know. I don't want people. There's some self-consciousness, I think, about what do you do to keep remembering your dead child? I don't want to feel like I'm sort of beating people over the head with it, but I don't want to not remember him. And I didn't feel like I should do another big thing, but I didn't quite know what to do. And so we ended up essentially not doing anything on the date of his death, which again, very much what Bennett wanted to do anyway. He does not want to go there. And I get that. And Melissa, I did want to go back to something you said a while ago, which is, even though I do really want to understand why JJ died, like you, I am absolutely terrified at the notion that somehow we'll figure out something that was represented a point of intervention, or something that I could have done or didn't do. And I know rationally that that's not the case, but I had my first ever panic attack before the first time the medical examiner called me to give me his first kind of sense of what happened. And I was just terrified at what I would hear. And I think, like you, Melissa, I heard basically, he had an infection. In his case, he had influenza, but his symptoms and what we saw in his body didn't add up to a sudden death. And we don't know. And like you, I think in a way that also is provides some comfort too. If the medical examiner can't see it, like what possibly could you do? So a bit of a digression, but anyway, I guess going forward, I think for the day of his death, we will definitely be aware of it. I'm going to try to distract myself as much as possible by doing other things, by being busy, by engaging with friends and family. And for his birthday on March 10th, I think we'll probably continue to do a small sort of private little birthday celebration, but it's bizarre. I mean, it's, of course, it's a scenario that no one ever expects to see themselves in or feel themselves in. And you both want to remember your child, and you want everyone else to remember your child, and it's very painful to be there with a cupcake singing to a kid that you haven't seen. For us, it'll be 3 years, and I know, Melissa, for you even longer.
Yeah, we did it. We did a little bit of a part, even though I was also doing. But part of me looks back on what I did that first year, and I that first year, people asked me how I was doing it, and my answer was then, and still is, I have no idea. I can't take any. If you mean that as a compliment, I don't think I get any credit for it. I have no idea how I'm doing anything. I'm just doing it. Um, but Grace was 4 when Alice died, and so she was 5 by the time Alice's it was her 3rd birthday. It was our first birthday without her, and then her death anniversary a few days after that. Grace really wanted a party for Alice, so in addition to this giant uh, concert that I threw with 5 bands and a silent auction and all these moving parts, I threw a small party in my backyard for Alice. I did not do cake, but Alice actually didn't eat cake at her last birthday. She had watermelon, so I put out some watermelon. I put out goldfish crackers that she loves. I set some sunflowers, which she loved, on a in her in season in July. Threw those on a table. A dear friend sent over one of those bubble artists that do those giant bubbles. Alice loved those also, and it was just very and I think a cooler full of drinks, like, and I made it clear that I'm not really feeding you at this at this party, but if you want your kids to come play in some bubbles, you know, come on by. And a lot of my friends without children showed up as well. But that was really something I did for Grace. I could have lived without that, but Grace was and still is very interested in celebrating other people's birthdays as much as her own. And I figured it was, no one's really asking the little kids what they need in these moments, and sometimes they can't verbalize it, but she was able to verbalize that she wanted a party for Alice, and I knew what my limits were, and for once I honored my limits, so I was proud of myself for that. So I did that, but I since then I haven't really done a party per se. We might go blow bubbles in a pretty place. We might have a toast to her. We might, you know, order dinner from a place we've wanted to go and haven't been. We might do something like that, but I've not done a party since that first year. And the first year I did it really more for my daughter, to be honest. Any questions or comments? And again, if you are in listener mode and you want to ask a question, you can hit the emoji button, and the hand raising symbol is all the way to the right. Dr. A?
So this is for both of you or for anyone else who's experienced it, how do you find your own way in that kind of thing? I mean, all the people who died in my family when I was younger, nobody ever talked about it. So I'm wondering, like, how did you find your way through these dates?
I
That's a
can.
great.
It is a
Go ahead,
good
Maureen.
question. I was going to start by saying I shocked myself as a cultural Jew who is adamantly secular by how helpful the Jewish rituals around death actually were. I didn't expect that, but we have a wonderful rabbi who knows exactly how secular I am and knew exactly how to engage with us about this. And we had a really lovely and special memorial for him after about 3 or 4 days after he died that 300 people attended. That again, as for his sort of death memorial a year later, this was for him, but also just for us, and represented our community. And the Jewish Shiva ritual was also remarkably helpful and healing in a way that I hadn't anticipated. And so that gave me at least some initial guidance in a way that I would have vehemently protested against if before this happened to me. I didn't feel like religion was for me. I'm still not religious. Had I had a sort of a firm belief in a God before my almost 3-year-old son just dies for no reason, I probably would have even less of one. But I never didn't have one to begin with, so that didn't change anything. But that helped. And then I think just being surrounded by friends and family who are very much like, you do what feels right for you. There are not rules here. I think the major challenge for me has probably been navigating how to manage Bennett, my husband's perfectly reasonable feelings about how to do things, which sometimes are similar to mine and sometimes are different. But of course, he has equal right to how we process JJ's death as his father. But it can be difficult sometimes to navigate some of the ways in which we're different.
Absolutely. I know that's challenging. People ask that. My marriage did not survive the loss of Alice, and people often say, "Oh, the death was too much," and you know, the death was more the death knell, really. But the most diplomatic way I can explain it is, everyone grieves differently. Not We don't even grieve deaths. We don't even individually grieve different deaths the same way. We don't even grieve the same death the same way 5 minutes later. So expecting two entirely different human beings to grieve the same way at the same time for all of eternity is just a notion we really need to throw out the window. It's not helpful. That said, it can be incredibly difficult sometimes for if people have vastly different styles of grieving. They can't help it. You don't know. People think, oh, if it was my kid, I would have done this. And I see all of this like bashing of Sandy Hook parents, and if they really, that's not what I would have done. You have no idea what you would do. Let me just say that loud and clear. You have absolutely no idea what you would do. I used to think that I used to think I would die for sure if something happened to my kid. Sandy Hook happened not long. I write about this in my upcoming book. Sandy Hook happened not long before Alice died, as did, I don't know if you remember the story of Madonna Badger, and her house burned down Christmas morning, killing her 3 children and both of her parents. I had to stop watching the news. It was the worst thing I'd heard. And I think then Sandy Hook was the next December, and then Alice died a few months after that. And every time I would hear stories like that, I would think, I don't know how those parents even make toast again. I don't know if those parents, so people judging bereaved parents, even before I had kids of my own, even once I had kids that hadn't died, I have never understood the judgment of bereaved parents. I think if they can walk up and get themselves a glass of water, they are winning. Is how I always felt about it. Because I was sure I would die. I was positive I would die. Well, I didn't. And I was sure that I would spend every minute thinking, what would she be doing now? What would she look like now? And aside from maybe there was about 5-6 weeks where that was happening, and then it just stopped because I realized I can't I I can't see her as anything but two. And any kind of mental exercise to make me do that just seemed like self-inflicted pain. Like this summer was the first time I caught myself saying, I wonder what she would look like as 11. And then this was all happening in the back of my mind while I was hiking. And then I, 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 I began to see the wheels turning and how they were turning against me. Oh, and that I was getting frustrated that I didn't know what she would look like. And I was like, whoa, nope. Will continuing down this train of thought be helpful to me? Clearly not. I'm worse 5 seconds later down this road than I was 5 seconds ago. I don't and will never know what she would look like when she was 11. And so doing that to myself just felt bad. I went way off topic, so I'm going to try to round myself back. But the point is, no one knows how they will respond. Expecting a couple or members of the same family to respond the same way at the same times until the day that they die is unrealistic. That said, if people have very different grieving styles, it can be difficult to be in the same house. In that same vein, we don't know how we're going to feel 5 minutes later. I don't know how I might feel differently next year. I might need to do different things next year. And what part of my path has been learning that if I find that I need to do something different next year, it's okay. So, Alexandria, your question was, how do you know what to do? You don't know what to do. There's nothing that prepares you for the. No one has thought what. No one has really thought out with any detail, unless your child. Perhaps if your child is chronically ill and you know it's fatal, perhaps there is some planning there. And even then, most of my bereaved friends who whose child died over a long period of time, even they say you can't really prepare for it. You think that you are, but the finality of when it really happens is just something that you can't get. So I don't think really anyone knows what to do, but you can follow your heart and what you see that your family might need. In those early days, I had really no idea what to do, so I really kind of looked to see what Grace might need. I knew she needed that little bubble party, so I did that. I could tell that I felt bad crying in front of her sometimes, but then this incident that I will discuss on another show at another time because I want to keep this wrapped up here. I first looked like what does Grace need, because she's not really old enough to verbalize it, and I don't want her. I don't want to quash anything she might need because I'm barreling through doing what I think I should do because I don't really know. And this is where I think religion can be. I was raised Lutheran, and I've had issues with that. And no offense to God. For me, it's more what people do in God's name that's troublesome. But I have never really been associated with an organized religion since I was a child and forced to go to Lutheran school. The day that Alice died, one of the thoughts I have, and I write about this in the book, was, oh, this is where organized religion could come in handy, because they will tell you what funeral home to call. They will tell you, they are good at providing signposts for those types of things, and you can make this. They help narrow the decision making process. And in some religions where there really are beneficial rituals around death. America, I don't feel is great at it. I know my Jewish friends have found a lot of solace in Shiva. I know that the Irish do it pretty well. There are cultures that do death better than we do here in America in general, and I think that can be really helpful. On the other hand, so there was a minute where I was like, whoa, I don't even, like, where do I even start? I've never even considered that I was going to have a funeral memorial for my child. But once my friend Bubba really kind of became my executive functioning after Alice died, once he kind of took over, it became easier to make the decisions that we needed to make. And in the end, I was relieved that we were able to honor Alice in a way that was unique to our family and our situation. But I absolutely see how religion can really help provide signposts at a time where you don't know what end is up. I also wanted to follow up something Maureen said. Yeah, and then not needing necessarily to keep doing that every year. Because it sounds like, Maureen, like me, you may have had a few moments of thinking, "Oh, this is what I did last year, so this is what I guess I should do this year," and then having to realize that I don't know if that's the thing I need this year. So this is all a very long way of saying, Doctor A, that um, I don't think anyone knows what to do. I think that sometimes, if you kind of pay attention to the death rituals around the world and with your friends, you start getting ideas, and it can, and this is something that I really encourage people to do before they lose someone, so that it's not research that you have to do once it happens, so that like, oh, I remember hearing about this one thing, and that's something I can do, and then you can do it. Does that help? I know that was very rambly, and I apologize.
No, I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, coming from a family where once somebody died, and then they had the funeral, and then that was basically it. And it was pretty rare for anyone to even talk about the person they lost unless they were in the midst of a horrible spell of grieving. And so we certainly never talked about their birthdays or their death dates or anything like that. And so I was just wondering, I mean, did you have to figure that out all by yourselves?
I did, but I don't know about you, Maureen, but I was kind of grateful that uh, my other family members didn't insert their expectations on me. I know a lot of bereaved parents who have experienced that with their families or spouses, and even have had to cut people out of their life because other family members were imposing what they thought they should do on there. So in a way, it was a relief to figure it out myself, because though I was lost for a few minutes or maybe even a few days, I I know myself well enough to know what's going to be helpful. Like, could I do this? No, I already know what's going to happen. I'm going to tank if I do that. Could I do this? yeah, maybe, but I don't know if I can do that much planning. Is there a way to do it without more planning? And you just kind of tease it down. I don't know. How about you, Maureen?
I was lucky to have people around me who were very much wanting just to be there for support. And I felt no pressure and just essentially offers of, you tell me what you want and I will help you realize it. And so I felt very supported, and fortunate in that respect. But I know that it can be much more complicated and challenging for many other people in many other settings. So I don't want to minimize that, but I experienced really positive support and input and facilitation of what we wanted to do.
Yes, I as did I. And to your point, Dr. A, I also think I would have found it incredibly difficult if people just wanted to ignore it completely and never speak of her again. And that I absolutely know that I couldn't do. However, the part of Melissa that uh, there was still a little tiny piece of what was always a little tiny piece of me to start with that will unapologetically do what I need to do in a situation. I have to really be pushed to get to my to get to my unapologetic place, and I can get there easier now that I'm older. That's one of the gifts of aging. I think aging and going through some shit will teach you to get there faster. But I I feel for you because I that would have been really difficult if I was in a family that just okay, we had the funeral, that's it, we don't discuss that person anymore at all. That would be really difficult. And in that in that situation, I think I would have just had to find a what I needed to do, and b invite safe people to do it with me is what I would advise for anyone in that kind of position. How about you, Maureen?
I was just thinking as you were talking that one thing you learn after you lose a child is you really don't give a shit about stuff that might have
Fucking
happened
A.
to you before. Yep. So if somebody was going to be difficult, or if they were suggesting or pushing things that I didn't want, well, too bad for them. Like, I just didn't care, and I very much would have cared before JJ died. I mean, it's amazing how that changes really quickly. I remember the morning after JJ died, turning to Bennett and saying, "This isn't necessarily a good thing, but like I feel bomb proof. Like nothing else can happen to me now that's worse than what just happened." And
Absolutely.
so that does kind of help. Like I really don't care, and so I'm gonna do what I feel like is best for me. I mean, obviously, I don't want to like hurt other people. I want to be considerate, but I just am not going to deal with people who are going to contest what the only person who really can give me pushback about the way I want to honor JJ would be Bennett, and no one else really. I just don't care.
Amen. I had that same experience. I write about this also. I felt simultaneously destroyed and capable of anything. I, I, I had this overwhelming image of when I realized it was the next morning already. I had, and this is, I'm sure, magical thing. Well, I know, I'm positive it was magical thinking. But I was also aware that I was experiencing magical thinking. I looked up and I was mad at the sun for coming up because I didn't want it to be a different, even if she was dead, I didn't want it to be a different day than the day that she had been alive at some point. So I was mad at this. This all happened very quickly. It's going to take much longer to explain than it did to experience. I saw the sun. I was mad that it was up. I didn't want it to be another day. And I had this overwhelming pulsion to reach up and push it backwards in the sky so it could be the day before. And I felt like I could probably do it. I felt absolutely destroyed, but also like, you know what? Who says I can't push the sled backwards? I might be able to do it. So I like you, I also had that feeling of I I think that maybe I can do anything, frankly. And it really helps you to not give lots of F's about things. to the point where I felt like I had a superpower. And I know I've discussed this with Beth, who's listening in today. Hey, Beth and Mo. Beth and Mo were there for me from day one, and I love them so much. Beth edits my blog when I write it. Now I've been working on my books. I haven't blogged so much, but wonderful people that were there from the beginning. And I just, I just felt like I, it felt like a superpower, and one that I wish I had sort of figured out a different way. And then because I was on a guilt trip, then I felt guilty that I didn't learn these lessons in a different way. But it absolutely felt like I don't have to try not to care what these people think. I just don't. I just don't. I don't have to talk myself into not caring what they think. I don't have to talk myself into um I don't feel the need to rationalize what I need to these people. I just don't care, like you said, Maureen. And it felt good. And I felt like, how do I teach my daughter to get to this place much, 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 much earlier than I did? Um, but yes, I completely resonate with that. Before we sign off and round back to Dr. A and Maureen, I just want to go over a couple of other ideas that other parents, other bereaved parents that I know submitted. Some parents say they go camping and they need to get out in nature, which I totally understand. That's how I've felt the last few years myself. Another parent um, spoke of going to, I guess there was like a little, in schools, like they might have little fun like they're not hopscotch anymore because that's old school like us, but they might have like little fun things kids can do in the hallway rather than walk, like like little paths. Somebody had created one of those in a school in their child's memory, so they visited that. um, I send the counseling center for whom I raise money in Alice's memory opened a second facility in the vastly underserved Watts community, and they dedicated one of the rooms to Alice. So on her birthday, I send flowers, and sometimes on her death day, if I feel up to it, I take something there, either bubbles for the kids that come in, or a big tray of watermelon, or something like that. And years that I don't feel like I have it in me to go there, I will send something else. Some parents are more like Maureen, where they describe like I don't even I just need to get through the day. Some parents just need to get through the day, but kind of go the opposite way of Maureen. And like, I'm in bed, Netflix and chill. I turn my phone off. I'm just kind of waiting it out to be a different day. Also, absolutely, totally fine. There's no wrong way to do it. Um, any last thoughts, Dr. A or Maureen or anyone listening in?
I think I just want to reinforce there really isn't a right way or right thing. I mean, Melissa, both you and I have done some kind of, fundraising, public servicey kinds of things, and that was meaningful to us, but that definitely doesn't mean that that's what has to be done, or that that's the only way to, like, quote unquote properly honor or and memorialize your child. I would never ever want to impose pressure. I needed something. As much as I wanted to remember JJ, I also needed a distraction. And that for me was a way to sort of positively distract myself. And for other people, that can be very different.
Absolutely, that's a great point that you just made, and I'm glad you did, because I do. I have a friend who's also a debris parent who I could tell um, felt started to feel bad in herself that she hadn't done something like this. Some kind of fundraising thing, and I had to sit her down and go, no, 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 no. This has selfish origins as well. It helps me not go completely off the rails to do this. And if I could do it a different way, I would. This is just all I know to do right now. And that you do something different in your child's memory is absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. You never ever need to fundraise any money in your child's memory. You don't. No one needs to do that. It's just what I needed to do. I am very happy that what I needed to do could help other people, and that and knowing that I was helping other people was helpful to me. So it wasn't, that they do say that maybe there are no pure acts of charity, and it might be true. It was helping me as well, knowing that there are people out there that I will never meet that will have access to services that will change their life in Alice's memory, and that is what's going to get me through today. And if something else gets somebody through the day, God bless them. I don't care. You eat cookies out of a bag and drown yourself in Cheetos. It doesn't matter what you do. It's just what I needed to do. And as I discussed earlier, the last couple of years, I realized I needed to do something else. I still raise money. I do it in a much quieter way. I do a Facebook thing, or I send out a link, but I haven't had a big event in me the last couple of years, and that's also okay. So I'm glad you brought that point up, Maureen. It's a really important one to make. It doesn't have to be a huge production. It can be, you walk to the park in your neighborhood. It can be that you don't go anywhere. It can be that you take the day off work. It can be that you order a meal from a favorite restaurant. It can be that you ignore it. There's no right or wrong way. And thank you, Maureen. That's such a great point that you brought up. Any last thoughts from anyone? Okay, then we will wrap this up today. Maureen Neiman, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated your contribution to this conversation, and thank you all for listening. I hope you found some solace or some ideas of what you might do for yourselves or others when they're grieving. And as always, thank you to Alexandria, Dr. A, my Vinny, who runs this room and does all the things in the background that hosting requires, so that I can just focus on leading the conversation. I deeply appreciate you and everyone for joining. And I will be back next week. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamarinemonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.